Welcome to Military Faith and Spiritual Resilience. This is Elizabeth Fulgaro. With me today is Erin Nichols, nutrition and fitness coach and Gold Star wife. Thank you for being with us again, Erin.
Thanks for keeping me around.
You bet. So you were sharing about a wonderful wedding with Sam that clicked all the boxes in terms of fun and special casualness for your guests, and then Sam heading off to boot camp, and what it triggered in you with depression. And then you've shared a little bit about being afraid of mental health issues. And I wondered if you could share a little more, and also maybe go into where was your spirituality at this point in your life?
Well, mentally, I didn't really have coping skills at that point, and that was kind of the beginning of the walls going up. And so between, Marine boot camp is 12 weeks, and then they typically get 10-ish days off, and then they go to MCT, Marine Combat Training, which is 3 weeks, I believe, at Camp Pendleton. I was able to see him on the weekends for that. And so I was driving back and forth between Northern California and Southern California. Happened to have one of my most, oldest friends, Megan. She's 5 years older than me. And right around the time Sam went to boot camp, she married a Marine who had just reenlisted. And so when we, kind of moved away for the first time, I had Megan there. They were stationed at Camp Pendleton. And so before we were actually officially at Camp Pendleton, I was going down there to see him on these weekends it wasn't even a full weekend. It would be like 8 hours on a Sunday that he would have off. But I was able to go stay with Megan and John on base. Nice. So I would drive down, stay with them, and then just be able to drive up. And so that made it really nice. So I was able to see him then, and then from there, he went to Fort Sill in Oklahoma, which is the Marines and the Army both do their artillery training at Fort Sill. And you're not supposed to take your wife to your MOS school. And he technically didn't, but I basically drove out there and got a furnished apartment, a little studio apartment. The rent was $256 a month, furnished, which was like $10 less than our car payment at the time.
Oh my.
I just cracked this up. Like, wow. Okay, Oklahoma. But I could see why there wasn't much there. There were 3 grocery stores, and 2 of them were Walmarts. And that was really depressing as well. And because he was on base, he had very little what they call liberty. On the weekends, I was able to come and hang out with him on base, but we couldn't leave. We had to stay there in the area, and so we played Risk. There was this kind of cool covered area where we were. It was cold. It was like February and March, but during the week, I was basically just waiting until 4-ish that hopefully he'd be able to call.
Oh wow, Erin.
And if he couldn't, then I knew he couldn't. It wasn't, there's part of it. It's like, does he just not want to call me? Like that insecure part, which that was never the answer. If he couldn't call me, it was because he couldn't call me. There were a few times where I was able to actually go pick him up. I think I was able to bring him back to the apartment once or twice. But that was when I started recognizing this wall that I was putting up to protect myself. Because it was like, at 4 o'clock every day, was I going to be disappointed?
So what did that wall look like? I mean, how did it manifest?
So one of the times that he was able to come back to the apartment, we, got Popeye's chicken or something like that and brought it back. And I was telling him that there's like this wall that's up because I didn't want to let him in too much, because I know that in an hour and a half, I have to take him back, and then I might not see him for another 3 days or whatever it was. And we'd already had months apart at this point, and then who knew what the future was going to bring. So this was kind of the beginning of me learning to cope emotionally as a Marine Corps wife, and develop what I would later call deployment mode, which if you're a military spouse or family member, you probably know like your version of deployment mode. But there's a level of like emotional blocked offness you have to kind of be able to protect your heart so you're just not hurting all the time. So actually, when I told him that, he was like really upset by it. And I think he actually like cried a little bit.
Was this while you were at Fort Sill?
Mm-hmm.
So it was hard on him too then.
Yeah, it was probably one of the only times I ever saw him cry about anything. And it was, he's like, I feel like you're breaking up with me. And I'm like,
Oh, wow.
like, that's not it at all. But he
No.
knew that he and the circumstances were what was kind of causing this distance between us. But it was what was necessary at the time.
To get you through.
Yeah.
How did you deal with the depression? Was it also the walls? Is that what kept you going? Or was there something else?
My DVD collection of
Yes.
Friends.
Yes.
The Friends TV show. That was the main thing.
Okay.
It's because it was the moving out that apartment, that tiny little studio apartment was the first time I'd ever moved out. You know, I moved out to his house, and then and so I didn't know anything about like if you want to have cable, you have to call. It has to be set up like weeks in advance for it to actually be there. So, and when I was growing up, like the TV was always on, and it was just kind of like that background noise that's your friend.
Yes.
And so then being in a completely different place, February in Oklahoma, at least eastern Oklahoma, is ugly. It's just brown, like dormant Bermuda grass everywhere. And I didn't know anybody. And I maybe would be able to get to talk to my husband in the evening. And otherwise, it was just me in this little apartment. Or I would go to Walmart and like walk around.
Makes sense because now you didn't have the job to fill the day, right?
Yeah, I had nothing to fill the day. And so I was literally just waiting around for that phone call. And so I watched Friends. That was basically
it. Makes sense. And you made it through it.
Yeah,
but
it was familiar, hard. And they were my friends.
So what happened when he finished in Oklahoma? What happened then?
So then he was officially assigned to his permanent duty station at Camp Pendleton, Las Pulgas. He was Kilo Battery 312 attached to 211, an artillery unit there, kind of in the middle of the base. And then we just online, because we didn't live down there, but just online, I found an apartment for us to stay in. And we, kind of began our grown-up lives there. And let's see, it was the middle of May when we moved there. And then I think his first deployment to Iraq was September or October. So it was a pretty quick turnaround between, our first stint in Oceanside and then his first deployment was the big Operation Phantom Fury, the big Fallujah assault in November of 2004.
So he was part of that.
Yeah.
How was the deployment for you? How was it for him? And where's your relationship with God at this point?
I didn't have much of a relationship with God at that point. I thought I did. I grew up Catholic. I never didn't believe, but I didn't have a saving faith at that point. I had stopped going to church a few years before that. Maybe 2 or 3 years before that, because my dad was the choir director, and I would be sitting up there, like, next to my grandma in the choir, asking forgiveness for the premarital sex that I was going to go back home and have again, with no intention of stopping. And so there was a combination of guilt and like, what is this? Like, why? It just didn't make sense to me. Kind of the faith at that point didn't make sense to me. And mostly I felt guilty that I was asking for forgiveness, and then I was asking for it, but I wasn't actually repenting.
Sure.
And which, it felt icky at that time, but it wasn't until later that I understood that. But during that deployment, I basically fell asleep every night praying.
Okay.
And what he did, for the most part, it was a little bit different during the actual Fallujah assault, but mostly what he did, they were operating out of Camp Ramadi, and mostly what they did was convoy security. So they would be, a big string of Humvees, and they would take goods or people from one place to another.
So if he's security, what's his role with that convoy? I mean, what does that look like? What is he doing as the convoy moves?
So at that point, he was Lance Corporal. I think he picked up Corporal during that deployment. Maybe he picked up Lance Corporal during that deployment, actually. So he was just Marine in the back seat with a rifle.
So he was riding along.
Yeah, he was just riding along, and then, whenever they would get somewhere, they would have to post security, whatever, clear the perimeter. If there was a mechanical issue or something like that with the vehicle, they took a lot of contact during that deployment. They had a lot of firefights where they would actually be like firing from the vehicle, or if you were not on the side of the vehicle where the shots were coming from, they would get out and then come around the backside. Use the front of the Humvee or the back of the Humvee for cover and all that. So yeah, they took a lot of contact that deployment, and which fortunately I didn't know at the time. I learned all this stuff
afterwards.
Yeah, I learned all this stuff when he got home. Heard some scary stories, some close call stories. But he was on convoys most of the time. So, he'd be gone for a week or something, and then they'd come back and he'd be able to make a phone call.
How are you dealing with that? Because that's even more separation, right?
Deployment mode.
There you go. Okay, so what came in and added to the Fort Sill wall that made it full-on deployment mode?
Stop looking at the news, which was difficult because that was an election year. That was the W. Bush re-election year. I was living with my parents during that deployment, and I was working part-time at a small bank locally. Every now and then, because it was such a small branch, every now and then I would do full-time hours because someone was on vacation or something. And then I took like 2 or 3 classes through University of Phoenix because of when he deployed. He left in like September or October, and so I missed the beginning of the traditional school semester. If I had gone back to the community college. So I did University of Phoenix just so I could kind of be doing something productive.
Mm-hmm.
So I did 2 or 3 classes and then worked and like hung out with my brother-in-law. That was pretty much it. My brother-in-law was like my almost like my Sam stand-in kind of. Like he was my buddy during that. And when we were that for each other because the 3 of us were really tight the last couple of years before he left. And so we basically spent like every evening together hanging out.
So this is Sam's brother?
Sam's brother, Donnie. Yeah.
So he's concerned about him too?
Yeah. Yeah. And not just concerned about him, but it was like, he was our best friend. The 3 of us were best friends. And so we were missing the like linchpin piece of the triangle, right? Like he was the unifying factor with the 3 of us. And so, yeah, Donnie and I kind of had each other. So, he took me out. I turned 21 during that deployment. And Donnie's a year older than me. So the three of us are, at that point, Sam was 20, I turned 21, Donnie was 22. And so, yeah, Donnie took me out for my 21st birthday, and that was memorable.
Well, good.
Yeah. Not in a good way, but, everybody's got to have that experience.
And so how long was Sam gone?
7 months.
So he would have come back in the spring then?
Yeah, I want to say it was like March or April that he came back.
Can we talk about that in the next episode?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Erin.